Okay, so set everybody up. I hope everybody had a great lunch and maybe got some work done if you needed to. So for this last part of our symposium, we are going to focus in on the Road to Recovery theme with ideas of moving forward collaboratively. We are going to spend the first 20 minutes, if you need, just looking at what has been added to the Padlet. And I can go ahead and share that right now. And but it might be easier to access through your own open tab on your personal computer because you'll need to scroll down. But I'll bring it up just so everybody knows what I'm referencing. So that's what we'll do for the first 20 minutes. And then that will be followed by moderators discussing each one of the themes. So that section will be 12 minutes per moderator max. So that should be about an hour. And then we'll spend the remaining time discussing action steps. So I'm going to go ahead and share the Padlet. All right, so thank you for taking a moment to look through those and add comments or extra items. I think it's really helpful to the group. So we have 5 different moderators for this afternoon discussing each one of these different topics. Our first moderator is, or I guess I should say facilitator, is going to be Jenny Davis. And Jenny, hey everybody. Go ahead, sorry.
I just wanted to get on and bring up the conversation about the recovery planning efforts with the Fish and Wildlife Service again. Pretty much you can see the comments here. There's not a lot new. I kind of wanted to see if people still had questions. Mostly once you guys saw the timeline that we have projected and with the recovery plans starting in 2024 and not being finalized until mid 2025, there's a lot that can be initiated right now, and a lot that should be initiated right now or even last year, or whatever. But that's pretty much it. If people still had questions, let us know. We will be sending out with the SSA, we do the Dear Interested Party letters, and if people want to send in information, they can do that too. But Megan and me and we're here. We're available for people to reach out if you have things you want to talk about or make sure are included, or yeah, and on there. So with since this is something that's come up a lot, with some of the wintering grounds and the international stuff, with recovery plans, and with the SSA, we'll get into that, but there's not a lot of like activities that we can necessarily put on there and have a lot of certainty that it'll occur. So that's something that really could be worked on by the working group or other folks. So if anyone has questions, I do not have the chat up. But if anyone has questions, just let us know.
Yeah, Edwin has their hand raised. So Edwin, go ahead.
Hey, Jenny, thanks. I think even though the recovery plan is applicable in scope to the US, right? That's where the Fish and Wildlife Service has regulatory authority. I think it will still be important to mention international activities in the recovery plan, because I think that would perhaps facilitate funding, for activities, and it would justify partners seeking funding from the service or other entities.
Yeah,
those actions are identified in the recovery plan.
And I totally agree, and that will definitely be included. I think it's more like a lot of the federal agencies are required to help with recovery plans. and to pay attention to recovery plans. So that's kind of where I was going with that. But anything that can be done internationally will be included.
Thanks.
Thank you. If we don't have any other questions, I think we can move on to the next section.
Hey, Jenny, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
Will you remind us again the different venues for providing input to the process? And I know states, have a process with the service for how we provide input, but for other partners, just to remind us what's the best way to provide that input and at what point.
So with the Dear Interested Party letters, if there's information people want to send to us, they can, and send us anything that you would want to be included in the SSA as we go through information. And then, so the recovery plan itself will be published in the Federal Register and will be out for comment. Both, I think, a draft and the final. Between then, I could be missing some stuff, but I don't think that there's anything else that's official. But we will try and include partners along the way.
Thanks.
Yeah, and the SSA will have a review process, but that's kind of a limited in scope. Not a out for the entire public, because it's more of a more akin to
Partner.
Yeah, peer and partner review process, and like a journal publication. But the service will always accept information. It's just how the timing of when the information arrives versus where we are in the process of reviewing that or working on a particular project. But we're right at the beginning of this, so if you're interested in providing information, get in touch with Jenny or any of the other people in the service on this meeting today, and we'll be happy to get you onto that list of Dear Interested Party, and you can submit information separately as well.
Yeah, I just put my email in the chat if folks have specific information they want to make sure is not overlooked or need to get in touch for any questions, feel free. And I think our timeline for our first kind of expert meetings is maybe February. I'm not exactly sure yet. As Jijan just mentioned, we're still at the beginning of the process, but we'll definitely be reaching out to a broad range of folks to try to get input and review the information and drafts that we're preparing. So, and that of course includes state agencies as well. So.
All right. Thanks, Jenny. Okay, so our next moderator, sorry, I'm looking at my script. Our next moderator is going to be Callie and she's responsible for identify and prioritize main limiting factors for yellow-billed cuckoo throughout their full annual life cycle.
Hey everyone. So I was just going through the Padlet, and I think overall there was quite a lot of agreement, I think, amongst the group about what we think some of the main limiting factors might be. I think one that got a lot of discussion this week is food availability. And we've talked a bit about, how to measure prey abundance. I think a lot of us like the idea of using NDVI, I don't know if we know 100% how well that correlates with the insects that cuckoos are eating. I mean, in general, NDVI is often used as a proxy for insect abundance, but yeah, how well that does, how well that works, it would be interesting to like investigate that a little more. The other, I mean, major one that has been talked about is habitat availability. And I think that, I think habitat loss on breeding grounds, migration, and winter are probably key things. They're also potentially key things that are really easy to measure with remote sensing. So that is great for, developing full annual cycle models. I think the one thing, at least for breeding habitat, that might not be as easy to measure, at least with remote sensing, is this idea from a lot of the breeding research about vegetation structure. And so having that, understory, that is something that I think might be a little tougher to investigate, but yeah, so habitat availability. I think, like we were just saying, we have a good idea of what good nesting habitat might be for cuckoos. At least in some of the Western habitats, it could be slightly different in some of the northern areas that haven't been as well studied. But exactly what makes good habitat on the migration and winter, that is still up for debate, I think. And so I think we can use some of the satellite tracking data that we have to investigate that. But I still think, aside from just looking at forest cover, what else constitutes good habitat for cuckoos outside of the breeding season is still a question mark. The other things listed in the Padlet were temperature extremes. I think that's true in the breeding and winter grounds. Maybe not as big a deal on migration, but I'm not sure about that. Drought and water regimes. Again, I think that I think we all know that's a problem on the breeding grounds, and I think on the non-breeding grounds, it's probably a big deal as well. And then finally, something that we talked about that's related to food availability is insecticide use, and that the use of pesticides, and that could lead to lower food availability, but it could also have detrimental effects just in terms of direct mortality to cuckoos or reduced condition. I think we discussed how there are blood and feather samples out there for cuckoos. We talked about it in terms of using it for genoscapes, but that could potentially equally be used to look at insecticides. I really don't know that research, so maybe that's more for the critical high priority questions, the next section, but that could also be a threat. So does that kind of summarize, am I missing anything? Food availability, habitat loss, temperature extremes, water, drought. Does that seem to cover most of what we discussed?
I had something to interject. I was thinking this last comment here on the geomorphology and trying to use natural processes or sort of introduce more natural processes into systems is likely also a limiting factor that probably influences a lot of the other things that we're talking about, more of like a ultimate cause.
So in terms of like habitat availability, or sorry, I'm not seeing the geomorphology comments.
It's kind of in the last comment, very last comment, and it's something that we talked about also in my session from before on limiting factors. And yeah, sort of like reintroducing natural flows, and it would affect habitat availability, prey availability, a lot of the things that we're also talking about. So when this is breeding habitat in the Sacramento Valley largely consists of restored riparian habitat, which has been developed, managed, and maintained with an enormous price tag and limited resources. I anticipate a concept of setting back succession in these areas would be met with criticism and resistance, focusing on promotion of restoring river meander and natural scour accretion. I guess that doesn't talk about geomorphology, but it's, you know, talking about the processes.
Yeah, I just want to say that was, we talked about that in the Southwestern Willow Flycatcher Recovery Plan. And I put in the chat a citation for a paper that came out of that. It's a white paper in the Willow Flycatcher Recovery Plan, but there's also a published article. And so we definitely did that for Southwestern Willow Flycatchers as well. Talked about that subject and that topic.
Yeah, and I guess that could be really important, you know, thinking about, you know, developing a population model and then projecting it out in the future, you know, having information about what kind of restoration is occurring and whether it's natural or not probably will influence, you know, what the habitat will look like in the future and what the reality of it being maintained is.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that was different about the Willow Flycatcher Recovery Plan was in the downlisting is the first downlisting from endangered to threatened was all about numbers. But once you got to a certain number, the next downlisting from threatened to off the list was actually no change in numbers, but protecting habitat and having more of the river corridors protected. So recognizing that riparian systems are very dynamic. And so one patch of habitat cycles through, you know, being suitable to being unsuitable, to being potential, to being occupied.
Yeah, that's an important point in terms of habitat availability and how that changes over time, just in a natural system. Yeah. Any other points that we maybe missed? If not, we can definitely move on to the next section. Okay.
All right. So next section is facilitated by Jenna, and it is identify the most critical high priority questions for research and monitoring.
So I feel like we are kind of going round and round talking about the same things, but let's see, the first thing on here is impact of pesticides. And when I'm thinking about that, I'm wondering how would we test that or measure it? Like, how could we make that something that we could research if there is an impact? So I'm curious about that, but I do think it is a really important high priority question for research and monitoring, as I'm sure all you do as well. We did talk about adjacent land use, which seems like something that could be used for management recommendations. If we could figure out if Yalba Cuckoo occupancy and productivity are linked to different areas. Oh, Patty has her hand up. Do you have a comment about the pesticides?
Oh yeah, I was gonna just add to the pesticides. We had talked about that in our session on limiting factors, and people were suggesting that perhaps with the pesticides, we could actually contact landowners to see whether they would agree to not use pesticides anymore, and then perhaps do some kind of an experiment where we measured or surveyed for cuckoos or measured insects in areas where they agreed to stop using pesticides and areas where they didn't. That's a potential study.
Do we have, I'm sure pesticides are influencing cuckoos, but I'm just wondering if we have good info about that. Not even necessarily cuckoos, but other species. And yeah, I just don't know much about pesticides.
Who knows?
I would suggest, I mean, a start might be
just sampling for pesticides at the survey sites, just to see even if it is an issue. And I don't know what all that entails, but soil samples or water samples or whatever is typical for sampling for pesticides, just to see the range of what's out there. And you could also see if that related to cuckoo presence or not. It'd be a start.
And not even just dealing with insect abundance. We have several sites where we monitor for cuckoos with adjacent agriculture, and we will often have our surveys interrupted by the flying airplanes nearby that are spraying for weeds in the rice fields. And it is not uncommon for them to accidentally overspray into the riparian zone. So there's also damage to the habitat that's being caused on occasion by overspraying.
That's the same in Idaho too. We also have spraying happening during our surveys.
Okay. Hey,
It
Mira,
feels often like the airplane is following you while you survey. It's very frustrating.
yeah, that's terrible. Mira, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, in the 70s, I believe, Steve Lehman was monitoring a nest in the walnut orchards on the Sacramento River. Saw they sprayed, and I believe most of the young died in that nest. So just, a little observation there. And then also, saw a bird on San Pedro that appeared to have been poisoned by pesticides. But I primarily wanted to say that Steve worked with, drawing a blank on the name. I believe they did a publication about it, but compared pre-DDT cuckoo eggs, in museum collections to eggshells collected on the Kern River, and found that there was a significant difference between, the DDT era eggs and the post-DDT era eggs. We found significant thickening, I believe, was the finding of that. So that's one study that is out there. Steve should have access to that if we could reach out to him. I'm sure I have it somewhere, but he would probably have ready access to that.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's good information. And as you can see, the action items, we're trying to populate those as we go with things that we could be doing. As we all know, we're all busy. We have limited resources, including time. So I guess that's the whole point of trying to identify these limiting factors and where survivorship might be the lowest, and focusing in a little bit. But all these things are really important and are critical high priority questions. So the next one that we did, well, I guess I kind of said this already, but adjacent land use, figuring out if that influences yellow-billed cuckoo occupancy, positive or negative, that could be really important for management. If it's more the natural areas where cuckoos maybe are foraging in the upland, maybe that could be something important for management recommendations. Full annual life cycle model, this keeps coming up. There is a comment on here, metapopulation modeling should be a longer term goal after more telemetry data are available, which, yeah, I guess I respectfully disagree, but I don't know. Go ahead.
I don't know if you saw, there's two questions, or one comment, one question in the chat one from Brett. The question is, are there entities actively monitoring ambient pesticides in the environment, water quality, regulatory agencies, municipal water providers, etc.?
I don't know. We could add that to the impact of pesticides. Let me see if I can find it.
And then Glenn Harper adds, probably a good idea to identify map where pesticides are being used in relation to occupied yellow-billed cuckoo habitat.
That's a really good idea. Yeah, I like that.
Here in California, that would be very difficult to actually map out, because each individual county is their county ag commission is responsible for taking the records from the individual people who are allowed to apply pesticides, and it is up to them to compile that reports. There's not there's not a lot of mapping that goes into it for the county ag commissioner level. It is just a Excel spreadsheet where you say, I am in this county and I used this amount of this chemical during this time range. So unfortunately, I think it's a great idea. And for surveyors, you could definitely mark where you're seeing spraying happen, but it would just be a very difficult thing to bring in from the county ag statewide level to try and consider.
Okay, good to know. I mean, I do like the idea of just sampling right at the survey point because that's a more direct relationship. I only have a few minutes, so I actually do want to hear what telemetry data can tell us more than the full annual life cycle and maybe why we should focus on that first. If anybody wants to say.
Can you say that again, Jenna? Sorry, I missed.
Oh, I have a comment in here that's talking about metapopulation modeling should be a longer term goal after more telemetry data are available. And I was just thinking the full annual life cycle model is really important because we need to figure out where survivorship is the lowest so we can have targeted conservation actions because we only have so much money, we only have so much time. And so I'm just wondering why telemetry might be more important to focus on. I mean, I just wanted to hear ideas on that, if that can provide information that could be critical. I'll let whoever think on that or all you guys think on that. The next one.
I do think it's important just because we know cuckoos are moving around. And so, I mean, at least our tracking data really shows how the Arizona birds and California birds are moving into Mexico and spending a lot of time there and moving around a lot. It would be interesting to know how that works in the other Western areas, like in New Mexico, are they moving around a lot, or in Idaho? Yeah, just to see how much movement between those populations is occurring.
Go ahead, Mary, you have your hand up.
Okay, yeah, I read the question differently. I just read it said it's also another long-term goal to do that because metapopulation monitoring, modeling is very important. And so, yeah, we need to look at links between populations or know more about that, how often cuckoos move to different sites to get to do that metapopulation modeling. But it is really critical if you want to know that to come up with a good recovery plan.
Yeah.
And I'll jump in. Bruce, that was my comment. And,
sorry, Bruce.
It's okay. I said longer term goal, thinking, one of the things we want to do is understand if we stabilize the core populations now, how do we recolonize areas where cuckoos are absent or sparse right now? And that's the sort of, it's the same issues that have come up on Swiffle. So I think it's, it's really important, at least in the long term, for effective recovery.
Cool. Thanks, guys, for the clarification. I agree. I'm sorry if that comment came off wrong. Okay. Prey base. I mean, we've talked about this a lot. Incorporating insect surveys into monitoring efforts. I don't know if that could be a coordinated effort, but it seems like it need to be part of the protocol, maybe? I don't know. Oh, Callie, you have your hand up. Go ahead. I think I'm running out of time.
This is just going to be quick. I mean, we don't even necessarily need telemetry data if we do build that genoscape. Potentially, we don't need to do expensive telemetry work to look at how populations are moving or like where the Idaho birds are coming from, that kind of thing.
I do like the genoscape idea, especially since if she already has a lot of the blood and feathers, and it just is a matter of getting someone to analyze it, writing a grant to support that potentially. Oh, I did want to get to focus research similar to what has been done in Arizona, New Mexico, and Lower Colorado River at the more northern sites. So I don't know, research could focus on one of the populations in Colorado, Utah, or Idaho. It seems like Idaho might have the most out of those areas. Anyone want to jump in? Okay, my time is up.
I was gonna say, that was my question, and we actually addressed that in a session. So
Okay,
I
cool.
think we covered that. Basically, there aren't enough birds. So
All right, thank you.
All right. So our next facilitator is Patty, and she is reviewing, identify where there is low-hanging fruit to implement recovery action.
Right, and we kind of discussed a lot of these things also in another session. But I think here maybe what we could do is maybe try to go into those low-hanging fruit areas. So get kind of specific about what we're talking about. And I just wanted to say kind of like what we mean by low-hanging fruit, and it's areas where maybe stakeholders would be amenable to trying to implement recovery action. Like there's areas that are probably are going to be easier than other areas to kind of, if we're going to try to implement natural flows or change the system like that, or try to anyway, or convince agricultural landowners to, maybe stop using pesticides or any of these things that we're talking about. There's probably easier areas than others. And in the Road to Recovery videos, and sort of their whole mantra is kind of, trying to involve stakeholders at the beginning process, and then convincing other stakeholders, that, this works here, maybe we should do it, or we're getting positive feedback from our customers or whatever. But anyway, so that's what I guess we're talking about. Low-hanging fruit is like places that it would be easier than other places to go ahead and try to help cuckoos on the breeding grounds during migration, or on the wintering ground. So there's a couple of ideas. I guess I was looking for ideas. There's one idea that I had, and it comes from that Chinook salmon example. And I was even thinking, we could write some grants for restoration in places. The Chinook salmon example I was talking about is in the in levee setbacks. So the Sacramento River, in a lot of areas, they're actually the levees are kind of becoming they're not working as well anymore. So they're having to move them, and they're convincing landowners to sell their land so they can set back the levees so that the river can have a better meander and more function like it used to. So anyway, I can't write a grant like that because my advisor was actually involved in the structured decision-making process that discovered some of these high priority areas for the Chinook salmon. But linking cuckoos to Chinook salmon and trying to come up with a grant where, hey, let's see if we can make cuckoo habitat from these Chinook salmon rearing habitats. Anyway, I don't know if I'm making any sense, but places like that, and maybe we could pair up and write some grants for places like that for actual restoration on the ground. And then there's another one in here about, perhaps the Lower Colorado MSEP projects. Perhaps we could try some of these things I was talking about in my talk there. And then of course, going back to Arizona, where it seems like there's more populations there, and maybe we'd be able to learn things or learn a lot more by trying some recovery actions in some of these sites. So if anyone has any ideas maybe about specific sites perhaps that we could, are just ripe for, hey, let's try to get more breeding habitat on the ground, or on on wintering grounds as well, or during that over migration. If not, well, there's some other comments here about carbon credits and climate change, and maybe we could be working with industry places around riparian habitats. Looks like Marilyn, do you have something to say?
Yeah, that was my comment. I know here in California, there's a lot of discussion about flooding farmers' fields, that type of thing in the winter. And in fact, building in structures to do that, to flood those areas in the winter to allow groundwater recharge. And it just seemed like that might be another opportunity for tying in habitat and something that is very much on people's mind, managing for drought, future drought, or current and future drought.
So did you have any places in mind?
Probably just along the Sacramento and San Joaquin Valley. There's agricultural lands, and including orchard lands, the surrounding areas that we've already talked about, but also that might possibly be a way to access some water rights that aren't otherwise accessible, and put those to a slightly different use, again, as part of a overall climate change, water recharge, big picture process. Not sure, nothing specific in mind, but that's very much a conversation that is going on in Northern California, and certainly throughout the West, of course.
Right. Yeah, and I can see it tying in really nicely. It seems like a lot of opportunities are in the Central Valley for collaborations and getting stakeholders together.
Patty, I'm not sure you saw, Kathy Wise commented the Agua Fria in Arizona is possible option to test restoration measures.
Okay.
And Shannon, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I forced myself to talk. Yeah, so here in the Colorado desert, we don't have a whole lot of cuckoos, but we have some, and we have a lot of mesquite, and we have some riparian forest. And so we have a wetland restoration project that we have started to figure out, is actually, it's linked to the riparian forest health. So I feel like we have a lot of opportunities to improve our riparian forests through this existing, like using that as a match, whatever. And just need help. Please help me do that. It'd be awesome.
Do you mean like maybe write a grant or by helping you?
Yeah, because I guess I'm in a good position now as a state, I'm in the state of California here, but I don't have a lot of experience being in this position. So I think there's people in this group that could hold my hand a little bit, and I can start. And also we're starting to develop a really good relationship with the tribes around the area. And we had a meeting with them the other day when they're telling us, we recognize, these tribal elders are telling us, yes, we recognize that the water is the most important thing and drives everything. And so we would do rock drops and brush weirs to slow the water down and trap the sediment. And we're just thinking, oh my God, what, we're just in our own little world as scientists, and we have a lot to learn.
Yes.
So
Agreed. And, having all these stakeholders too at the table is really important, and getting them to, come on board to, write grants and actually do things on the ground. That's what we're looking for. I'm getting some comments here in the chat. Jeff said that Topak Marsh along the Colorado River has a lot of fallow land around it that can be converted to wetlands, and a number of canals that could deliver water to those areas. So I'm thinking that after this meeting, we'll be able to compile a lot of these ideas, hopefully. And what I'd love to do is try to come up with a way to prioritize some of these actions. And yeah, the San Pedro River in Arizona, Agua Fria in Arizona, the test restoration measures. And kind of next steps for this is trying to come up with the money to do it, and trying to involve stakeholders. So keep the ideas coming. We have the chat, and we can save this, and we'll be able to look at it later. And this isn't the end of this.
Yeah, Nick has his hand raised as well.
Oh, sorry, Nick. Go ahead.
Hey, yeah, I just wanted to mention, because I just put it in the chat, and it kind of reminded me that for me personally and my work, the low-hanging fruit has been volunteers and community scientists that have come on board and helped us out and contributed pretty much the majority of our data collection in Southeast Arizona. And I mean, we're lucky that Tucson and the broader region has a really enthusiastic birding community, and that kind of helped us out. But birders are everywhere, and community scientists are everywhere. So continuing to engage the public and inviting them to become participants in monitoring can really, at least it seems like it can really overcome some of the funding challenges.
Right.
So I just want to put that out there.
Yeah, and it also serves two purposes. It gets people involved as well. I'm not sure how much more time do I have left?
Technically 15 seconds, but we can go a couple more minutes if you'd like.
I just wanted to sort of give a mention also that at the bottom here, in this category were genetic mapping and survivorship. And so someone has identified those as low-hanging fruit. And I'm thinking there's maybe two kind of aspects of this, like low-hanging fruit for restoration and low-hanging fruit for research and monitoring and science. And I think these two kind of fit under that. And also the survivorship one would fit into the full life cycle model. And obviously it would be very important to have this type of data for informing a full life cycle model.
I can talk to Kristen and ask her, where the Cuckoo is in her list of priorities and what she needs maybe to speed it up if it's not coming soon.
Great. Yeah, that's regarding the genetic mapping as well, the blood and feather samples.
Yeah.
Both. So John had his hand up first, and then Edwin.
Okay.
Hi, I know we're about out of time here, but low-hanging fruit, the 2022 is looking to be a big year for Cuckoo surveys. And I was wondering, one, we collect a lot of data during those surveys, specifically the habitat data. How useful has that been? And now is a good opportunity to revisit and possibly revise what data is collected during surveys.
Good point. I'm actually making that an action item here. Yeah, maybe we need to look at that and come up with a preliminary analysis to see what's informative and maybe what we're missing, or what, what might be some better variables to collect, or what the best use of that time is. Because I imagine it's difficult to do too much while you're in the middle of a survey.
No, but 5 minutes before or after a survey is enough time to collect some data. And I'd like to request, has anybody here ever looked at that habitat data that's collected during Cuckoo surveys?
Yeah, John, if I could just follow up on that point. When I've done some Cuckoo trainings in Southeast Arizona, we've had participants ask, what do you do with this habitat data? It seems awfully specific, but also kind of coarse, at least in some of the categories, and awfully subjective as well. And it kind of stumped us a little bit to not exactly have a strong answer for saying what we do with all that data. And it seemed like some of the, the consultants and contractors felt like their time might not be being used very well. And like you just said, though, we kind of came back and said, well, it doesn't take you a whole lot of time to do that. So at least we have the data for the long term if we want it. But I was thinking about the prey base potential for adding those types of surveys into that as well, like we had previously mentioned. And I think it'll kind of come back to the same thing where we'll have to have a pretty good rationale for why we're asking people to do some kind of standardized prey surveys if we're going to ask them to spend additional time doing that, when their real job as, say, a consultant or contractor is just to go tell us if there's cuckoos there or not. So to require additional data collection might rub people the wrong way if it's not specifically on cuckoos, but at least for things like the range-wide survey, it seems like there'd be plenty of rationale for including that kind of additional data collection.
This is Matt. Yeah, I've analyzed some of that data that's been collected on the surveys, and it was in a report for the statewide surveys that we did in Arizona in 1999 and 2000, and it was published in a symposium. And it's pretty broad, but it really showed that, for those surveys that we were finding, as far as cuckoos mainly in native versus exotic, and sometimes even that category of being in the mesquite. So, I mean, it's broad, but I think it's of value. And I think it would be a value of just, if we could come up with some scheme to look at, noting insect, and you couldn't get abundance, but just presence and what kind of, even down to family, what is out there. It might be worth rearranging that or changing that, or asking people to kind of add that into their into when they're surveying.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah. I want to add that for, close to 10 years, we had a little box on the survey form, the one that was developed over a number of years between Steve Lehman and Southern Sierra. Anyway, and basically, unless it was cicadas, it's really difficult to get any kind of meaningful information. I mean, maybe grasshoppers if you see, but people aren't going to see katydids and caterpillars. So I'm not saying it's not useful, but it would definitely require some thought to how to have that be any kind of meaningful information. Perhaps like with the cicadas, there were several different categories, and that seemed to work okay. But again, if there's no cicadas, it's not useful. Perhaps a presence, did you see prey item potential, or any of these 5 prey items? How many? Were they abundant? Were there a few? But again, it's like what we see and what the cuckoos see. I mean, this has been a question for 30 years, how to determine prey base. That's been really clearly a really important question, and it's so difficult to address. I'm not sure how just a regular surveyor, unless they're cicadas, is going to get any meaningful information.
Yeah, and we know that some sites have cicadas and some don't.
Right.
We do have this as an action item. It's obviously a pretty important one, so I think that we'll move on with that. And actually, I think I'm out of time with this section. So
Just real quick, yeah, I agree with Marilyn. It's, I mean, but as far as like broad, like, you know, the lower Colorado and that Delta area in 2006, when we found all those cuckoos, when we got off the boat, I mean, grasshoppers were everywhere and we never saw grasshoppers. I mean, so we, something like that, as far as noting, and then, and there it correlated with, you know, I mean, the habitat was appropriate too, but there, it really added to, you know, why they were there also. But I would talking, I agree with Marilyn. It's really hard to get any type of data, but on a broad level, as far as grasshoppers or cicadas, might be worthwhile.
And also just like to maybe another actionable item could just be like, I mean, I think we touched on this a bit, like Edwin and Russ maybe said this, that because they're compiling the survey data for the big range-wide survey, that they have a lot of this data together. But I think one of the things I've definitely struggled with for the Cuckoo project is accessing that survey data. It is available in reports and stuff, but it's very time consuming to go through all those reports and extract the data. So if there was an actual database that had that, maybe I'll let Russ go because I think he knows more about this than I do.
Just because I think we really want to move on to action items at some point, we can do, Russ, if you can keep it under 35 seconds, you can totally comment.
Well, I think this is an action item, so maybe we can dovetail.
Perfect.
Action items, I don't know.
Yeah, we can leave it to an action item discussion. It's we're happy to. I hope we'll have a relatively complete compiled data set, and I want to just plug. If you have data that has not been compiled into the state data sets that were supplied to us, please consider how to make that happen for the 2023 follow-up modeling effort. We're not going to have time to do it now, but we will want to make sure we have that, confront the models with the data in 2023. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all the comments. Okay, thanks, Patty. The final discussion item before we move to action items is identify opportunities for co-production, which will be led by Jay.
All right, howdy folks. Nice work getting to this point. This has been a information overload, but in an exciting way type of a symposium. So the last topic before we move to some discussion on action items is to look at these opportunities for co-production. And there are 5 topics that folks have. Oh yeah, it was just pointed out I'm wearing a Cuckoo shirt. Subject appropriate. So 5 different topics that I can just go through briefly, and then we can see if there's any points of discussion. So the first one that's listed there is foster reliable citizen science to improve our understanding of the species in northern latitudes, and some comments about what's happening in Colorado and where a lot of the data has come from. And I think it's definitely worth continuing to foster those relationships and try to encourage that. I know in Idaho, a lot of birders often would go to some of the same places to try to get cuckoos on their year list or on their Idaho state list. And now with playback being banned, which is a good thing, or at least, you know, without a permit. Anyway, so there could be some complications there, but definitely something that's worth exploring as far as just how do we get more data from eBird and other forms of citizen science. A comment I threw on there, because we're talking about, you know, wintering grounds and dry tropical forests, and is also thinking about how do we do co-production things in the United States. So seeking incentives for private landowners within the breeding range of the Western distinct population segment, including Mexico, to maintain and restore habitat on private lands. And then the few topics that had been in there prior to our session today include, sorry, I have an excited 15-month-old that just came back inside and is saying dada over and over again, is to build ecological literacy capacity in non-biologist professionals. And so I think this dovetails with something we talked about from the morning sessions in terms of maybe coming up with a one-pager or a trifold or something like that that summarizes restoration actions that have yielded success, and then maybe some information helping to tailor that to different geographies. But then from that information, could we maybe develop trainings, whether they're recorded webinar type things, or if this COVID epidemic ever goes away, can we get back in person and have some like on-site workshops with some lecture, but some talking about restoration and trying to build that capacity. So I think that's a really good idea. There's some good comments on there, including building human dimensions literacy among biologists. There's also a comment that I think is really valuable, looking at structured decision making. And there's an article that's linked there that could help in terms of just this whole group moving forward and thinking about, you know, how can we find priorities that work for biologists, for conservation, but also private landowners, agencies, et cetera. And that involves kind of a lot of the road to recovery action items. And obviously this symposium is taking us towards that. But I think as this points out, it would be really useful, I think, to have a dedicated coordinator for yellow-billed cuckoo conservation and monitoring, whether that's part-time or full-time. And so this is something that we've put in the action items to discuss a little bit later, but it would be hard, I think, for any of us in our day jobs to take this on. But I think if we could find funding for a cuckoo expert that could really put 3 or 6 months of their time each year into helping facilitate this working group continuing to move forward on and make progress on all these things we've talked about, that would help in terms of maybe starting a structured decision-making process. And then we've identified wintering grounds and stopover. I was aware of some of the tracking data, but honestly, this was the thing that sort of hit me over the head yesterday, is just tropical dry forests from Western Mexico down to the Gran Chaco, and the fact that there is so little of it left and it's still disappearing. And so how do we build capacity and incentives and building connections with private landowners, conservationists, et cetera, in all of these countries to help facilitate conservation of remaining forests and restoration efforts. And there's some examples in the comments, like work in Nicaragua and El Salvador and Southern Wings. I think there's, another action item is to look at funding sources that we might be able to pursue to help meet some of these action items. And I think thinking about how do we look for sources to send money south to help achieve conservation there. Let's see, did I get through all of these ideas? It looks like I have. So maybe there's a few minutes for questions, and hopefully this can sort of help us lead into discussion on action items over the last time that we have. And I think maybe I'll just take this moment to mention, I think it would be great if we can start to have people thinking about which of the action items you connect to and that you might be interested in plugging into as we go forward. But maybe I'll leave it, go silent for a moment to see if we have questions. Okay, so I see Nick and then Mary put hands up.
Hey, Jay, yeah, I totally love the idea of trying to get this working group, more momentum and like getting a funded position to try to take a leadership role. And I guess just, in lieu of having that funding right now, has there been any chatter about trying to form some kind of like leadership group or something like that within the broader working group to kind of steer things and try to, either go find those funding sources, or so that, multiple individuals can maybe devote a smaller amount of time overall and still achieve some of the same objectives?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think maybe Jenna or Patty, who have been the real heavy lifters as far as getting this symposium even conceived and then executed, could chime in. But I think, there have been a number of folks that have been helping plan this and seek speakers and whatever else that I think are committed to wanting to see this process go forward. But I don't think there's been any kind of a formal process or steering committee or anything like that I'm aware of. But if anybody else has information, feel free to chime in.
I could speak to that, but it looks like Mary had her hand up. I don't know if she wanted to speak to that first.
No, I just had a different point. So you can go ahead and answer that question first.
Okay, thanks. So I guess we've thought about that, amongst the group, we thought about having a coordinator, and I think where it really came from was the whole road to recovery process. And they've kind of identified that having an actual coordinator, one person to coordinate everything, and also, maybe a group of people also to be the steering committee, but one person sort of at the head who is organizing the direction of the group is preferable. So I think that's where, we're coming up with this whole idea of just, hiring somebody specifically to sort of direct the momentum for Cuckoos.
Yeah, and I think we can continue this conversation as we transition to action items, but Mary, let's hear your comment.
Yeah, I just want to make a point that the coordinator doesn't necessarily need to be a Cuckoo expert. It just needs to be someone who's good at processing information that we give them, and that's good with writing and putting things together. So they don't have to necessarily be a Cuckoo expert.
But they do have to love cuckoos.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, and it could be, a initial postdoc kind of a situation, or any of a number of possibilities. But and I see Linnea has a comment about potential large funders who might be interested. Oh, new reserves, et cetera. So as far as coordinator time, I think we'd have to think about where to seek that. Or, for example, could a combination of state agencies, federal agencies that have cuckoo habitat, maybe chip in together to fund, X number of months across the range of the Western DPS. So it could be a pretty cheap price tag for each individual entity, or is that just too complicated across, however many Western states plus into Mexico? Edwin.
Just following up on your comment and Mary's, I agree with Mary that I don't think it needs to be a cuckoo expert. And one of the things that the Partners in Flight Western Working Group has been pitching, actually Partners in Flight nationally too, is this idea of a conservation delivery specialist to help meet these kinds of needs for states and other partners. I can see a coordinator helping part-time with cuckoos and PNJs, for example. And so I think this is something that PIF has been promoting and looking funding for in the West and nationally. We've talked to the Pacific Flyway Council, MTC, the Non-Game Technical Committee. So there's a lot of interest in the idea. I think our challenge has been finding the right funding source, and it could be like a model you're suggesting where multiple states or multiple entities pitch in to support a coordinator like that helps different working groups. We did a session on working groups on the Partners in Flight, and we have a bunch of them across the West. And so this is something that I think we're working to address, and hopefully, we'll find the funding or the right vehicle to support this kind of need, to address this kind of need.
Yeah, that sounds good. I think just off the cuff, it seems like you wouldn't want it to be too watered down. Like you wouldn't want to say, here, handle these 10 species and their working groups, and then you don't have enough energy to focus enough on cuckoos or pinion jays. But maybe if there were, and I think it's worth talking about, like, what would it take? Do we need 3 months a year? Do we need more of somebody's time that could really make this happen? I just got the 1 minute warning, which, we're sort of talking about action items and we can sort of transition, but maybe I would like to give Jenna and or Patty a chance to chat as we head into the action items. And I see both Edwin and Jenna have hands up, although I'm not sure if Edwin is a lingering one.
I was just going to mention, and I think it's in the co-production thing, but the or under the structured decision making. The Rosie Finch Working Group, you know, they have that paid coordinator. I'm not sure how that all got worked out, but it could be a good model for us. And they're doing the whole structured decision making process.
Yeah, that's a good point. I can't remember if it was Tracy Aviary funding and or other sources to fund some of Janice's time. And I honestly can't remember, maybe Russ. Yeah, okay, there you go. I was hoping that Russ would put his hand up.
Sure, that is primarily Tracy Aviary funding. The facilitation of the state has kicked in some as well. That's primarily the Tracy Aviary. We were competing for small annual grants, and we were invited to apply for a longer term proposal, which has allowed us to extend that and bring continuity to that role, which has been really helpful. But it's not a big grant, but it's enough to keep things steady.
So what's the rough number of months per year so far?
Oh, good question. Probably a lot more than was bid. Janice works really hard, but this is one of several groups that she leads. So she has a broader portfolio than just Rosie Finch.
Yeah, makes sense. And from what I've seen, she's doing a great job spearheading the Rosie Finch effort. I see a comment from Colleen.
Yeah, I'll just say that Janice has been a great help, and you know, she could be potentially a good resource. But she's not a cuckoo expert, but she's a good person expert, which is probably more important.
So okay, so thanks everybody. My time is up on these opportunities for co-production, brainstorming, and so we'll move into action items. I see Colleen has a comment as far as potential for Fish and Wildlife pitching in to fund a part-time coordinator, or at least taking the lead on that. And I think especially if this would be beneficial to the recovery planning process, maybe there would be, you know, a mutual benefit. So yeah, maybe I'll go mute for a second, see if Jenna, Patty, or Kristen want to say anything as we move into discussing action items.
I have nothing to say. How do we want to do this?
I mean, I guess what we're really looking for with action items is we're trying to, you know, we came up with all these great ideas and things we want to do, but how can we actually implement them and get them done? And maybe who could take the lead on them? I mean, think of it as like a subcommittee. I mean, and if anyone's interested in the topic, you know, they could put their name in the comments that they could be part of it. That's kind of what I was thinking. Jay, do you want to add to that?
No, I think that's it. I think just
I guess
while we
I'm
have
stuck
a
with my work yet. Damn it. Sorry for my minute.
while we have a captive audience, I think it would be good to get some folks to potentially sign up for any of these action items. But I think there's also room to discuss any of these. And but yeah, so for example, the one pager idea, I think maybe I mentioned this before, as far as what has worked for restoration, that's something that I see a lot of benefit from. So I'd certainly be happy to help move that forward, but I would rely on other experts on the process to sort of help pull the material together. So just things like that, like what could you see yourself pitching into that, you know, would be beneficial to your work or synergistic with your work. So yeah, but I think there's room to make any other suggestions for action items, and certainly, you know, I think Jenna, Patty, and others will be going through all this and trying to compile notes and put this into an even more organized fashion. So there will be room for input, you know, maybe after Thanksgiving sometime once that's put together. But anyway, so I think there's room to discuss any of these, but also be thinking about, okay, who's interested, and maybe put your name in the comment as somebody who might be interested in any of these action items.
And yeah, if people could directly put the comments into the Padlet, that would be really helpful for us organizing. I see there's some comments in the chat that would be also great in the Padlet. I don't know if maybe they're already there, but that would be really helpful.
Yeah, and I'm actually trying to copy and paste what's in the chat into the Padlet so that we'll have people can see who's planning on working on what. Maybe we should just give people a couple minutes to look over these and see if they're interested in it, and then we can go over them with everyone.
That sounds good. I see Megan Conway has a really good question in the chat. I don't know who could answer it, but she's saying she'd love to have a centralized database where folks could upload survey data directly, so we wouldn't have to search for and compile information. I feel like I've heard this before. Susan started looking at options, but funding and someone to host it gets a bit tricky.
Yeah, it's kind of just a long-term goal of mine to have it all in a centralized place. Yeah, just trying to find out where data is, where it exists, getting it from folks. Edwin can probably speak to this a lot more, is an arduous task. So having it in one centralized place would be great, but I don't have the time. I'm not a data manager. I've managed lots of data in the past, but it's time consuming. So having like someone who is really good at database design and having an online portal and all that stuff is beyond my skill level. So. I mean, I know AKN exists and some other agencies might have some other things that work, but yeah, I don't know. I haven't found an exact solution yet, but.
Regarding the database, Barbara Coos with the USGS in San Diego has been compiling a database for least Bell's video, and at least has a data structure that works for them in terms of the available historical data, which is often not very specific in terms of exact, GPS and those types of information that were not available X many years ago. So the database was kind of developed to incorporate modern data gathering techniques and incorporating the available information that doesn't necessarily have all that information. But there's the point being is that she has a database structure that is riparian focused that might possibly help somebody trying to establish a database. I don't know.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'll get in touch with her and see what she has. I know BOR has a couple of different database managers for different projects too. So I've chatted with some of them. But yeah, if anyone else has other ideas or things that they've used, feel free to get in touch.
Yeah, Megan, this is Dave Moore. I was going to chime in. We have been maintaining a database for the state of New Mexico for both whiffles and cuckoos for many years now, primarily because we do most of the surveys, for both species in the state. And we could certainly kind of share our format as well, if y'all are interested.
Yeah, I've talked to Megan a bit.
I figured.
Yeah, I've used Access and can design a database. But I personally don't have the time to enter or proof or data management. And I don't know how to set something up like that would allow people from across the region to enter it remotely, like through an online portal. So that's where my capabilities get a bit limited.
Well, right. And I'm sure you have heard of the struggles and the various iterations that, various folks have had with that kind of effort for the flycatcher. So
yeah.
it's not a simple process.
Yep. Yeah, I think AKN might manage some of the, or they did at one point manage some WIFL data. I don't know.
Yeah, there was a time where there was an attempt at least to put some WIFL data into AKN. I don't know how it all worked out. It seems like it's just not designed exactly for, the kind of data that we're looking to dump in there. I don't know. I haven't investigated it a ton.
Didn't Edwin say that that's one of the projects for the products for the survey project is building a database?
I don't know if Ross is still on, but we're compiling the data, existing data that was available that we were able to get our hands on to map the occurrence for the model. And so we're working on to see what more beyond that this would be useful for. I know that Susan Sfera, who used to be the Cuckoo lead for Arizona, did attempt to develop an AKN portal for cuckoos, and I'm not sure. I was not involved in that process, so I'm not sure why it didn't continue. Yeah.
Hey, this is Russell. I'll be very briefly. We will have a compiled data set as one of our deliverables to the service, and that might be a good seed structure for a more comprehensive single site. And I think ACAN would be a good location, as Colleen pointed out. ACAN does have good data management controls built in. If it doesn't exactly, if the current structure doesn't, meet, to Dave Moore's point, meet the needs, then those can be modified. But it does need funding. It does need a manager to oversee that and attend to it. Otherwise, it's just one of these orphaned projects that drifts away. That's the opportunity, I think, coming up in 2023.
Hopefully everybody's reviewing the chat, because there's just some answers to some of these things in the chat and people discussing stuff. But feel free to keep adding to the Padlet too.
Also, to maybe make sure this didn't get buried in other comments, but I saw an intriguing comment from Hira with an interest in potentially volunteering to help with coordination roles until a more formal position is created. So something to consider.
Maybe as people are reading through these, I might just go through some of them and see if I can recruit anybody for some of the ones that don't have any people assigned to them yet. It looks like the first one, building a bird genoscape for the yellow cuckoo, and that Mary Whitfield is going to contact Kristen Ruegg about her plans, and then she's going to report back. So that sounds like that's taken care of for now. And then the next one is a centralized cuckoo database. We have some ideas about how to get it going. Is there anybody that wants to lead this up? I'm thinking that, a lot of these topics you wouldn't be the only person working on it, but that maybe you know how to do something like this, or you have experience with a centralized database, and you'd be a good person for sort of, or a good resource for how would we go about doing this? Where would we start? And then trying to recruit people perhaps from the working group. Okay, and the other thing too is you don't have to decide right now. You can think about it. And this, I'm thinking that the Padlet this will be up. Does Jenna or Kristen, do you guys know for how long this might be up for?
As long as you keep the link, which I know is strange because it has my name in it. Sorry, I'm new to it. But anyway, as long as you have the link, you can access it. I'm not going to delete it or anything. So.
Okay. Okay, so I'll leave the centralized Cuckoo database for now. The next one is revised data that is collected during Cuckoo surveys. So I guess that would be somebody doing the range-wide surveys, and I think I wrote that action item, and I think what I meant was, are we going to keep with what we're currently surveying for in terms of habitat data? Or, are we going to analyze what we have and see if we might want to have some different things that were different variables we're collecting information on? And it looks like Merlette Hunterman said that she's interested in working on this, so maybe she can take the lead. It's written in there now, you can't go back. Writing grants for restoration. I'd be interested in helping out with writing some grants if anyone has any ideas. And I'm especially interested in this levy setback thing that I'm not actually allowed to get funding for it, but I would help write a grant for that. So maybe I'll take the lead on that, and maybe trying to find other opportunities and seeing if other people want to write grants. The next topic is review information on pesticide effects on birds. And so I think what we're trying to do here is determine if there's any information already available, so we can make some hypotheses about how it might affect cuckoos and what if it's a huge threat on the birds or not. And looks like Linnea is interested in helping with that. And if you're interested in being part of that group, you can also put your name down here, because I think a lot of these things probably will require more than one person's involvement. And the next topic is develop full life cycle model. And I think Callie says she's working on this right now. I'm happy to take a lead on this. Right now, the biggest roadblock is compiling the available data out there, mostly figuring out what survey data and vital rates are out there. So this could be something that Callie leads, but we all maybe contribute what we have or what we know is out there.
Yeah, I mean, as simple as people emailing me what they think might be useful would be helpful. I mean, the compiling the survey data into a centralized database, I mean, that would be fantastic, but that's not going to happen right away. And we still need survey data. Right now, the plan is we would like to use eBird and whatever survey data we can get. The problem with eBird is it only goes back a certain amount of time. If we were able to find good enough vital rates, we could potentially incorporate that into the model. At the moment, we're not planning on doing that just because it doesn't appear to us that we have enough to do that. But yeah, whatever data people have available that they would be willing to share with us, yeah, would be great.
Is Kristen still on here? I'm wondering if I should put my screen up as I go through these so people can see what I'm talking about as I go through them. Thank you.
Let me just make you a co-host. There you go.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so that was a full life cycle model. Yeah, and I'm thinking that the working group listserv is going to be a really good way of passing information too. So if you have anything that you think Callie could put into the model, then send it to her. And then maybe Callie, if you're lacking in something that's really important, you could send out a message for that kind of information if we have it. And also, I mean, do you use expert information or expert insights in these types of models when you don't have a lot of data?
You can definitely do that, but you can only do that for certain. I mean, just like any model, you don't want to oversimplify things because then at a certain point, it's maybe not worth doing that model. And so right now, we're really thinking about taking an approach where we just use abundance data and link that to environmental change data. But that would be like a very simple kind of retrospective analysis in the West. But if we thought we could compile a good enough amount of vital rates in the West, then we could think about doing an integrated population model. Using survival data or reproductive data, like whatever is available. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I'll just move on to the Southern Wings project. And Callie said she's happy to work on this. Kathy Weiss, Edwin.
So I'd like to speak a little bit to that.
Sure.
I'm in the Southern Wings Technical Committee, and also I'm the Pacific Flyer representative for Southern Wings. So I would be happy to work with other folks, including Kathy and others. I think the first thing would be to gauge the level of interest from states before we work on a project, because we would have to reach out to partners on the ground, in Argentina or somewhere else, and putting a proposal together. And I wouldn't want to raise expectations about funding availability if we don't have at least a tentative commitment from one or more states that would be interested in this project. So, but I definitely would be interested in helping start the conversation through the Southern Wings mechanism. But that would be just my word of caution, because it's happened in the past where we've put together a Southern Wings project and funding did not become available. And so I want to minimize that of happening.
Okay. So. Perhaps also, if that doesn't work out, there might be other opportunities, where perhaps you have something sort of in the background that you're working on, and which could be used for several different opportunities if that doesn't work out. Mary raised her hand. Do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Also, I don't think we want to forget about Nick Bailey either, and looking at spring migration and how important that Columbia, the area in Columbia is to cuckoo migration, and they're already starting to do some restoration, and maybe helping him out to increase how many lands they do restoration on.
And we do have a Southern Wings project that's targeting tropical deciduous forests in El Salvador, benefiting cuckoos and other migrants, and that's through Arizona. So, I mean, we do have some open opportunities right now, but I think in the wintering grounds, we will need to work on one.
I just added stopover areas to that.
yeah, I think stopovers are important in terms of like other conservation initiatives. It would be great to hear if people have other ideas for that. I've applied for NMBCA 2 now. We haven't gotten funded. And again, we talked about this, the match is really what the issue is with that. And so we're out of match after this year. R2R, unfortunately, cuckoos isn't an R2R species, so there probably isn't much mechanisms to get money through R2R. We're not like a priority species. But yeah, like American Bird Conservancy, I'm not sure what their funding mechanisms are. Yeah.
Okay, well, it looks like there's a couple of people that want to work on this, so.
Hey, Patty, I just wanted to point out that we have 11 minutes left.
Okay, let's see how many more of these we have. A couple. Let me look and see which ones don't have people signed up for them yet.
Sorry, I was going to give the 10-minute warning, but thanks, Jenna.
That's okay.
Sorry.
Let's see, compile funding sources we have mentioned. Jenna's going to do that. Great, Jenna. Because I think we've mentioned a lot of things here and it's hard to keep track of. So going through this whole second day will be great for trying to put something together that people can refer to for, if they're looking for a grant. Summarize the Jamboard discussions, and Jenna said she'll help compile and organize. And I don't know, I had an idea that perhaps this would be a good symposium to make into a journal, a section in a journal. There's so many presentations that I think could be published here, and perhaps just a summary of what we came up with. Somebody had the idea of Western birds. I'll look into that, and anybody else that's interested, let me know. The Drafter Restoration one-pager. It looks like we have some people here that nominated themselves: Jay Carlisle, Kathy Wise, Russ Norval, and Lily Douglas. Great.
Patty, we do have a question from Russell for having to do with state leads. Does Section 6 have a regional RFP option?
Are there any state leads here who can answer that?
Sorry, that's maybe just an ignorant question on my part, but it might be a potential funding source in addition to something like Southern Wings or some of the work that we're discussing here.
Russ, I don't know if there's necessarily a regional RFP, but I do know there is, if you have multiple states that are working on the same project using Section 6, the match requirement is much lower.
Okay.
I forget what it is this very moment, but I think something like 10% match, something like that.
That might be a help. I was also thinking about the State Wildlife Action Plan grants, that there's a proposed option for a regional SWIG grant as well.
Mm.
Okay, great. And then Yellowbill Cuckoo Working Group Coordinator, sounds like there's some interest in that. That would be great if we had somebody to stand in or take over that role, that could take over that role. And Thurl Walker has shown interest in that.
Mary, did you have a question, or is your hand? I just noticed it was up.
No, I just forgot to lower it. I'll do that now.
Oh, this is great. That would be awesome, Kara. So I think we'll be in contact about that. Investigate how to survey prey. So I think that's a huge topic that I think it sounds like it might be even the hardest one. out there is trying to figure out how we can incorporate prey surveys into our range-wide surveys. And there's some people that are interested in participating in that. It looks like Nick raised your hand. You raised your hand. Would you like to say something?
Just on the prey, I just want to say quick about cicadas. At least in my acoustic data, I have cicadas all over my data. And so I do think that acoustic monitoring could be used to at least get some kind of idea of cicada activity at sites, or at least presence, absence, and potentially, some kind of like abundance proxy or something. So I know we've been kind of talking about the difficulty of getting insect and prey availability data, but that's still one potential avenue for one taxa anyway.
Cool.
Hey, Nick, real quick, do you get other insects like katydids? Do you record at night?
Yeah, so I did experiment with taking some recordings at night. I mean, and we've also got the recorders that they come on at 4 a.m., which is pre-dawn, at least for the majority of the season. So yeah, there's all sorts of insect data insect data all over the recorders. So yeah, what's great about the acoustic data is it's a permanent data record. So even if you don't initially look for insects, when you're just trying to get your cuckoo vocalizations extracted, you can always go back and take a look at that later. So I haven't done a whole lot of analysis with it, but it definitely is an option and something that wouldn't be too hard to start working on.
I think you could definitely use that to track phenology, but having done very limited acoustic stuff, I don't think you'd really be able to get an abundance, because like when cicadas come on, it just like blurs out that whole bottom part. And like, yeah, a lot of it matters about their distance to you, but I like the idea of using it for phenology, like presence.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. I was just gonna, I agree. I mean, 1 or 2 cicadas can sound like a million, so maybe not abundance, but for sure, like some kind of level of activity, like how much of the time of the day are you getting cicadas on your recorders, or if you have multiple recorders at a site, you can compare activity across the different recorders and get some kind of idea of what's going on. But just an idea, and for sure there are other insects that can be looked at, but I haven't even really dove into insect bioacoustics at all yet.
So we are just past the 5-minute mark. We actually have 4 minutes. I know that Mary has her hands up. So Mary, if you want to interject really quick, I think we wanted to move on to takeaways and just, takeaways would be the word.
I just want to quickly tell Nick that he can talk to Pat sometime about that, maybe starting in January, because he's a katydid expert, so he can.
So I guess those are the action items. I just wanted to say that we've finished up with them. If you wanted to move on, Kristen.
Yeah, of course. I was actually going to turn it over to the organizers if you had any debrief things to say. If not, I'll move into my closing statement.
I guess I was just gonna say as a debrief that if you want to be part of kind of the core group that is sort of in meeting, just email me or Patty or anyone. Hopefully everyone has my email, and we'll be in touch through the working group listserv. And I'm actually really hoping to try to coordinate a spring meeting, like not as long and lengthy as this, but maybe just to get together and see where we're at on some of these action items. I think that'd be something good to just check back in. Jay, Patty, did you want to say anything, or anyone else?
I just wanted to say thanks everyone for making it to the end here. And I think this was really productive, and I'm really excited about these action items and moving forward. So thanks again.
Edwin, did you have something to say? You raised your hand. Sorry, Jay.
Yeah, I missed the last few minutes, so this may have been discussed. But I think as part of the core team, it might be good to ensure that maybe there's geographic representation from across the range of the bird, so that, you know, obviously, as we know, that bird might behave differently depending on the range of. There's different considerations.
Well, we
and
do
so-
need someone from Arizona, Edwin, but you're super busy.
I'm volunteering Tracy McCarthy. She's on the phone. She's on.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we have representation from New Mexico, California, Idaho. Yeah, we're missing Arizona.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well-
I was just going to say he was going to volunteer me, and that's fine. I'm getting up to speed, but I'm getting up to speed quickly. So count me in.
Perfect, thank you.
I was just gonna say, let's maybe unmute for a second and give some whoops and hollers and applause for Jenna and Patty, but also Kristen for helping us moderate. I mean, I learned a ton. I was expecting to learn something that I didn't realize how much I was gonna learn. Yesterday was action-packed, and I think we've covered a lot of ground today. So anyway, I'll shut up and we can thank the key organizers.
Definitely. I also wanted to draw attention, Glenn Harper did comment about cicadas, if you want to look at that. I know that was part of the conversation just a few minutes ago. Awesome.
Thank you, guys. Good job, y'all. Very well done.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah, definitely
everyone.
learned a
We'll
lot,
be
you
in
guys.
touch.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, good job.
So just before people leave or as you leave, we did record both sessions from day 1 and day 2. And I have saved the chat text files. So when those are ready, I will pass them to the organizers and they will put them wherever they see fit. So you will have access to those.
Compiled. I think I volunteered for that.
Yes, you did.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And yeah, just to reiterate what Jay said, thank you so much for, especially for today, like really giving your input during the discussions, and thanks everyone for being here. And again, a huge thank you to the key organizers. This was an extremely well-organized event, in my opinion. I've seen a few working group discussions and meetings, and this was very well organized. So yeah, at that, I will leave the floor open if you want to say anything else. And yeah, feel free to have a great weekend, or it's not even the weekend, rest of your day.
Thanks, Kristen.
Mm-hmm.